So the agenda, we will be talking about, of course, why do we need air conditioning to set the context right? How does commercial AC systems work? Because most of you, in fact, all of you are students, so you may not be exposed to how actually things work, how the Carnot cycle, what you have studied, how it actually translates into equipments and systems. So I will be briefly touching upon that. Classifications of various kinds of air conditioning system and what is the basis of their selection. I would like to touch upon that. Then, of course, the steps which we need to follow. Of course, the steps as we described, you will understand that many of them can be combined. We have to move forward, come back, reiterations needs to be done. But at least some milestones I will try to give you, which will guide you in your competition as well as in your future life. Major contributors of AC load and how to reduce them. What is part load energy efficiency? This is a key in air conditioning system design, and understanding this concept is extremely important. And of course, we will end our topic with some specific design strategies to improve overall energy performance. So that's how we start. And if you have any questions, I think there's a chat box you can write there. Gaurav will be taking us through the questions at the end of the session. Okay, so why do we need air conditioning? Now, few of the things we possibly intuitively know: temperature control, humidity control. These are primary functions to keep human beings and even machines or processes in their comfort zone. It is also the air conditioning engineer's responsibility to provide the requisite cleanliness of the space we are talking about. It's also important to limit contamination. Contamination means if you're in an operating theater with a part of your system is on artificial support, part of your life system is on artificial support, your immunity system has gone down. So we need to ensure that bacteria, viruses, or germs are kept out of the environment. So that's done through a differential pressure mechanism. That's also a part of air conditioning requirement. Indoor air quality, we talk a lot about this. I'm sure all of you have heard about this term and its importance. So maintaining the required indoor air quality as per standards is also a goal of air conditioning design. And last but not the least, many a times we design and we install systems not for us, but somebody else. So increase the sellability or rental income from a property is what we need to look at. And many a times it's like supporting a manufacturing process. As you must be aware that there are many critical processes related to electronics, clean rooms, pharmaceuticals, printing, just to name a few, which requires highly controlled environment for the process to be successful. So just to relate to possibly what you have learned, this is Carnot cycle superimposed on a pressure enthalpy chart. So we have the evaporator, where actually at the end of the day, air conditioning is removing heat from a low temperature source to a high temperature sink. Evaporator is where actually the heat is extracted from the indoor space and the refrigerant takes it. And then the refrigerant is compressed in the compressor, and through an isentropic process, its temperature and pressure goes up. It goes to the condenser, where either there is a circulating air outside air, ambient air, or cooling tower water, in which the heat is rejected. And the refrigerant then goes through a throttling process or a metering process, or again an isentropic process, through which it loses its temperature and pressure, and then comes back to the evaporator for again picking up heat, and that is how the cycle proceeds. So this is what is the finally what happens in any refrigeration system. And I hope you understand that refrigeration system is key to an air conditioning system. It is the heart of the air conditioning system. So whether it is a window AC or your refrigerator or your car AC or a large central air conditioning system, at the heart of it, this is the cycle which keeps on operating. Okay, so just to give you some temperature ideas when we talk of commercial air conditioning, these temperatures, what you see, 44, 54 or 90, 98, these are all in degree Fahrenheit. Just to give you a quick reference, 44 is roughly about 6.6 degrees centigrade. 54 is about 11.5 to 12 degrees centigrade. 90 is about 32 degrees centigrade, and 98 is about 36 degrees centigrade. So what happens is, in a chilling machine, we cool water from 54 degrees centigrade to 44 degrees centigrade. So what happens is, this water at 44 degrees centigrade goes to an air handling system, where the water removes the heat from the air and brings it back. So the water comes back at 54 degrees centigrade and rejects the heat into the refrigerant. So the refrigerant picks up the heat and goes to the condenser and rejects the heat, where this heat is basically dissipated into the atmosphere, ultimate atmosphere, which is our ultimate sink, either directly to the atmosphere. We then call the air conditioning system as an air-cooled system. And if the heat is rejected into a circulating condenser water or a cooling tower water circuit, then we term the system as a water-cooled system. So we will be talking about air-cooled, water-cooled systems on and off. So basically, it all depends upon the method of rejecting the heat. If you are rejecting heat into a cooling tower circulating water, we call it a water-cooled system. If we are rejecting heat directly into the atmosphere, we call it an air-cooled system. So this is how actually a commercial air conditioning system works. So what happens is, the water which was at 44 degrees centigrade, we typically call it as the chilled water. So chilled water comes into the cooling coil of the air handling system, which basically there is a fan which drives the air. It takes air from the indoor space, mixes a little bit of the fresh air. The air gets cooled and goes back to the room to pick up the heat and moisture. And at the same time, the water which has entered at 44 degrees centigrade actually gets heated up, so as to say, to about, say, 54 degree Fahrenheit, and it comes back to the chilling machine. So the first loop is the indoor air loop. Now the second is the chill water loop. So what happens is, the chill water pumps, they circulate the water between the air handling system and the evaporator of the chilling machine. So then we have the refrigerant loop, which all of us are very well aware of, and it follows the Carnot cycle. This is what this refrigerant loop is, what we refer to typically in commercial or in practical life as the chilling machine, what happens inside a chilling machine. And then the rejection of the heat part, rejection of the heat part. So what happens is, there is a condenser water system with its own pumps. It basically takes the water from the cooling tower, takes the heat out of the condenser and goes back to the cooling tower, where there is evaporation of a part of the water evaporates and the heat is rejected to the atmosphere. We can also have a direct fan which takes in outdoor air, gets the heat rejected in the condenser and can go back to the atmosphere. So this is what actually is commercial air conditioning system, consists of finally this 5 loops. Now in each loop, there exists methods, ways of how we can improve the energy efficiency and the responsiveness of the system to variation in the demand load. But fundamentally, we have this 5 loops. So the moment we talk of a commercial air conditioning system, it will have this 5 loops. And basically, thermal energy moves, I hope you appreciate, from left to right. Okay. Okay, so these are the components. We have the chilling machine, then we have the pumps. Pumps can be chill water pumps. We will see further, how the chill water pumps can be configured to have more efficiency. Cooling coil is connected to the air handling device and the cooling tower. So these are the major components of an air conditioning system. So just to give you a pictorial look of what is the indoor air loop, typically here you see this is actually the air handling system, which has a blower, a lot of filtration system to clean the air, and of course the cooling coil. So what happens is, chill water comes into the cooling coil at 44 or 6 degrees or 7 degrees C and come out at 11 or 12 degrees C. The fan blows air into the conditioned space. You can see this magenta color, which represents the supply air or cold air into the conditioned space, which picks up the heat and moisture from the conditioned space and through this yellow loop goes back to the air handling unit. And to maintain indoor air quality, proper oxygen level, limit CO2 buildup, we need a little bit of fresh air. This is this red line, which may be 10%, 12%, or 15%. We will see how to calculate fresh air comes into the system, and an equivalent amount of air, because the conditioned space is not a balloon that you can just go and pumping fresh air. So either this air is, if it is a large quantity, we need a positive exhaust. We need a proper fan to bleed this part of air out of the system, or in a small commercial application, even we can leave this job to the leakages through the doors and windows to pass off, right? So air conditioning system typically cools and circulate the same air within the conditioned space with a fraction of fresh air. Now this is just a cut view of what happens inside the chilling machine, just to give you a feel of how things look like in a section. So what you see here, this is the evaporator, where actually these white circles are basically the chill water tubes through which water passes, and the refrigerant evaporates, taking the heat out of the water and reducing the temperature of water from about 12 degrees C to about 6 degrees C. And then it gets into the compressor, where the isentropic compressor takes place. It comes to the condenser, where again, these small circles are the tubes through which water from the cooling tower comes in at about, say, 32 odd degrees centigrade. Of course, these temperatures depends upon location to location, and the chill water temperatures also depends upon your actual ratio of sensible and latent heat. Those we can ignore for the time being. And the refrigerant loses its heat, it condenses, and then the refrigerant passes through this orifice, which basically does an isenthalpic expansion, or it can be an isentropic expansion also. And this is how the circuit goes on. So you can see mist eliminators, just to ensure that it's only the dry vapor which gets into the compressor. And we have some other your devices as well, the pre-rotation vanes, which helps to control the volume of refrigerant flow so that the delivered refrigeration capacity matches with the load of the system, right? So this is a piping schematic, how it looks like. This is the chilling machine. If you see this light yellow, this is the condenser water circuit. So what happens is, cooling tower, cold water comes in through a pumping system, goes back to the, after taking heat from the condenser, goes back to the cooling tower. So typically we call it as a condenser water circuit. And also we have a chill water circuit, which delivers the water to the cooling coils in the air handling units. You can see here there are two air handling units or cooling coils, and you can also see there is a bypass line. What this bypass line basically does is, depending upon the load of the cooling coil, if you don't require the full capacity of chill water to go into the cooling coil, the required amount is actually bypassed. So what happens is, exactly matching with your demand, the amount of chill water goes to the cooling coil, and the water comes back to the chilling machine. So these blue lines are the chill water lines, and this light yellow lines are the condenser water lines. So this is actually a schematic what happens in a commercial large air conditioning system. Okay, so there are broadly three classifications of air conditioning system. We will briefly touch on all of them. Of course, we will talk a lot on the central systems, because the other two are more or less, ready-made available items in the market, which you just buy in and fit it into your requirement. It has its own limitations and advantages as well. As we go on, we will discover. Central system is where every component of the system, the hydronics, the water distribution, the air distribution, the filtration, the temperature, humidity, everything can be designed. And this is something, a tailor-made solution for application-specific usages. So let's go to what is meant by a standalone system. Typically, the window AC is what we see in our houses. These are a perfect example of a standalone system. So it is a self-contained, it's a box factory-made unit. It's very useful for small individual room controls. It cannot control any cross-contamination or any significant filtration. Its advantages, it's low cost, and it's very easy to install. No standby means basically if your window AC, any component goes off, then your AC system goes off. So unless you have two window ACs, it doesn't give you any redundancy. So no standby, simple on-off control. So basically what it does is if you set a temperature of say 25 degrees centigrade, possibly the machine shuts off at about say 23 or 23.5 degrees. And again, once the temperature is 26 or 25 degrees centigrade, the machine switches on. So if you plot temperature in a space versus time, you will see there is a wide variation of temperature of almost 2 to 3 degrees centigrade. What happens in a typical window AC? Now, there is no humidity control. Of course, when you are cooling air, there is a bit of a dehumidification process, which you will see that any air conditioning system will have a condensate formation. However, it is not a controlled humidity control, right? So you get something, but if you want a specific control, say a 50% relative humidity, possibly you can't get it. Very low levels of air filtration. It's of course self-sufficient, and it's just a box. You install it, not dependent on others, as long as you are able to provide it with just an electrical connection. Another issue with the window AC is because the heat is rejected from the back side of the box, and it picks up heat from the front side of the box, the part which you see. So it needs to have an exterior wall for rejecting the heat, and hence for spaces which are not having an exterior wall, you may have a challenge installing the same. So this diagram gives you an idea of how it works, how the air circuit works. Balance, everything is contained in the box. For small hotels and guest rooms, it also is a solution which can work upon. This is what is a plan view of 4 rooms having its own dedicated window AC systems. We go to decentralized system. In a decentralized system, I hope all of you have seen the split AC units, what possibly you have in our houses or even your colleges and in small shops. It's slightly a better modification of the window AC system, where the compressor and the condenser, basically, which is an air-cooled condenser in these cases, mostly with a fan, they are kept outside the conditioned space. So it does help in reducing the noise, and also you can pipe the refrigerant from this outdoor unit to the indoor unit. So the installations where you do not have a exposed wall, we can go with this, right? So we have typically the indoor unit, which consists of the cooling coil and the evaporator fan. And you have the outdoor unit, which is called the condensing unit, where the compressor and the condenser coils are located. So there are no external exposed walls. This is a good application thing to use. And one outdoor can actually serve multiple indoor units. You must have heard about the term called VRF system, or variable refrigerant volume systems. It is an improvement of this decentralized system of air conditioning. So, but fundamentally, they are very, very similar. So another issue with this kind of a system is that you cannot specifically design the unit for your purpose. So typically, you cannot have the exact airflow what you want. You cannot have the exact depth of cooling coil you want. You cannot have the exact temperature of refrigerant or cooling media you want. So there are some catalog models, standard models. So the best fit model, you tend to pick it up, right? So they can, so just if you can read through it, one outdoor unit can serve multiple indoor units. Split units are various models. They can be ducted and located above false ceiling. So basically the air can be distributed over a larger space. It need not be a single throw unit. And the source of noise is separated because in an air conditioning system, the compressor is the item which creates the maximum noise. So compared to a window unit, a split unit is less noisy to the occupant. It can have redundancy. Suppose you have one outdoor unit connected to 3 indoor units. So even if one indoor unit is not working, at least you can work with the others. Multiple tenant applications, yes, it can work very efficiently. If your building has 10 floors, each floor has a single tenant, then every floor may have one decentralized system, and so the billing becomes very easy. It's fast and low cost of installation. Energy can be metered very easily. Limitations is, as we said, that installed capacity is normally higher, because what happens is, if you have 10 rooms, each room the requirement is say 2 TR, you have no other option to go for maybe a 2.2. Suppose your nearest available capacity is 2.5. So you have to buy a 2.5 into 10, 25 TR. However, I hope you realize that all 10 rooms during peak outdoor condition will not be required to run. And hence, if it was a central plant, possibly we could have gone for a diversity factor and actually installed, instead of 25, maybe 22 into 0.7 or 0.8, maybe 15 or 16 TR. So diversity cannot be applied, and fresh air and its filtration quantity also is not at all good in kind of a either decentralized or a centralized system. So if I wished I had a better picture. These are the condensing unit, the outdoor unit, typically kept outside the conditioned space, and this box is the evaporating unit or the indoor unit. So you can see that for individual offices, you can have individual systems connected to their electrical meter, so no disputes with billing, and it's an easy to install system. So in a central system, we can have tailor-made solutions. It's able to fulfill any or all the design parameters: temperature, humidity, space pressure, fresh air levels, filtration levels, whatever is our design intent, we can fulfill it. Diversity factors, as I just discussed a minute back, can be considered. It reduces the installed equipment capacity, which means reduced first cost and reduced operating cost. Generally, however, the first cost is for a central plant is more for a ducted split unit or a window AC system. A central system can provide standby needs very efficiently. Suppose my total requirement in a building is 500 TR, seldom we will use a one single chilling machine of 500 TR. We may go for at least 3 or 4 of them. So even if one is not operating, there are others to operate and give you partial comfort. So similarly, the air handling devices also are, every zone, every room will have, or every space will have its own units. So even if one is out of the order, the others can work. So it just gives me a lot of redundancy. Typically, space required for installing the machineries and equipments is higher. That's because of so many components which are decentralized, which are located, some located at the plant room, some located at the air handling rooms, and then fresh air fans will require another type of spaces. Maintenance is always, most major maintenance for the main machineries are always out of the occupied space. So I hope you understand this is an advantage with a central plant, which is not there with the centralized, with the decentralized or the unitized systems. Noise levels can be regulated to desired levels through acoustic treatment. Now, this is something which I follow. I just request all of you to have a little bit of focus in this. A typical question comes up with so many options available in the market or systems which we can go. How to decide which option to go for? So generally, a slightly analytical way of doing is, what are my typical considerations which are important for selecting a system? So if you look at these 8 items, space required for installation and access, what is the connected electrical demand, ease of tenant billing, total capital cost of the system, capital cost for the developer, because most of the time the large systems are tenanted buildings, like say a mall or a large office complex, where what happens is somebody builds the facility and somebody else, the tenants, actually pays for the energy bills, right? So while the owner or the developer is responsible for the capital cost, however, the energy efficiency or the power or the operating cost is paid by the tenant. maintenance cost for the total system, and maintenance cost for the developer. Now, it basically means is, suppose you have a central air conditioning system. Typically, the air handling unit, which belongs to or is located within the influence area of the tenant, typically he takes up the maintenance cost of that portion. However, the main plant, the chilling machine, the cooling tower, the pumps, they are a common facility, and generally the developer takes care of the maintenance. Now, depending upon your specific requirement, you can add, modify to these considerations. I hope you understand that each of this merits a discussion to decide which type of system to go for. So while these are the considerations, if you come to the right hand side, I have drawn 4 columns, which are basically air cooled system and a water cooled system, and each of this I have 2 subgroups, whether it is a central plant or it is a unitary or a dedicated central system. So basically we come with 4 alternatives, and how they have been marked: for any item, say space required for installation, the item or the variant which requires the least space is given the highest marking, say 5. And if this is highest, I compare how the other 3 fare. So central plant is worst because it takes the maximum, hence it gets a rating of 1. And unitary air cooled gets a rating of 3, central plant gets a rating of 2, air cooled central plant gets a rating of 2. Now you may wonder, where has 4 gone? 4 has not gone anywhere. If I say that the space required for a water cooled unitary system is least, then compared to that, the next best alternative cannot be given a 4, it should get a rating of 3. So that is how all these ratings are done for the balance parameters. And then each of these considerations needs to have a weightage. Now this weightage also depends upon the people or the stakeholders who are involved with the project, like the architects, the mechanical engineer, the electrical engineer, the lighting engineer, the property management, the sales team of the property who would be finally going out in the market and selling the space. So they all decide what should be the relative weightage of each of these items so that the total come to 100. And then you can actually take a weighted average and see for this particular installation which turns out to be the best alternative. So this is a rational way of selecting a system for your particular project, which depends upon the nature of the application, where it is located. I hope you understand many of these energy efficiency criteria may change depending upon whether the project is located in Bangalore or in Delhi or in Guwahati. Because in Guwahati, it's a very temperate climate. Delhi, it's a very hot and dry climate. So a water cooled system tends to be more efficient than a place like in Guwahati or in Bangalore, which are having temperate climate. So these factors, relative factors or points gets varied. Now this particular thing, actually, what I'm projecting here was done for a tall building, which was supposed to come up in Calcutta about 2-3 years back, with small size of tenants, over a 3.5 lakh square feet facility. So this is a analytical way of deciding which system to go for. Now, we will talk about the next step, which is some suggested steps. It's very important that the analysis is done for the requirement and collection of data required for that particular facility. So understanding owners and users requirement is extremely important, because depending upon the ultimate usage and the owner's criteria, the owner's requirements do vary. The level of temperature, humidity, cleanliness, pressurization, and IOQ to be maintained. We need this data upfront so that when we are designing the balance part of the system, we are in sync with the requirement. Similarly, what are the light loads, what are the equipment loads, which typically we refer to as plug loads, the occupancy load and their variation, all needs to be collected as the first activity to do before we start designing any air conditioning system. And of course, last but not the least, the building envelope load. Building envelope load means how the architect is conceiving the building peripherals, which means whether it will be a brick wall, whether it will be a glass wall, whether it will be an insulated brick wall, what he plans to do with the orientation of the building, what he plans to do with the facade, what he plans to do with the roofing, everything is part of the building envelope data, because your heat load calculation depends upon that. Energy sources, yes, extremely important. Always it is not only the electrical energy which is available. The architects or the project owners may be planning to go for solar energy in a big way, maybe using biofuel, maybe an installation has access to waste steam or waste heat which can be used. So all these are data which are important to analyze and to use it in your system design. Site environment condition, because if my facility is coming in a place which is very near to say a sewage treatment plant or a leather complex, then you have a lot of corrosive gases present in the atmosphere, and my system design, my fresh air system needs to be designed so that those corrosive harmful gases are treated before they are taken inside the building. And of course, codal and statutory requirements at the particular place where the project is coming up, because my design needs to comply with them. Performance objectives is the next important step, whether how efficient we want our design to be, whether this project wants a certification under some green building requirements of maybe GRIHA or Indian Green Building Council or Green Building Council of India or US Green Building Council, and what is the level, whether it is just a certified building or a silver building or a gold building or a platinum, or we have a 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, 5-star. So we need these data so that we can design our system accordingly. Energy billing plans is extremely important, because the electrical subsystem needs to be designed based on that. What is the capital cost vis-a-vis operating cost people are looking at? If owner says, no, I want a building which is cheap, don't worry about the operating cost. I have already a huge demand for my property, irrespective of the energy efficiency features, I am okay with it. I want a cheap solution. You may have a requirement where the owner comes and tells you, I'm in a heavily competitive market, because typically the energy or the operating cost is more than 85% of the total life cycle cost of an air conditioning system. I hope you understand what life cycle cost means. It means basically the cost of ownership, total cost of ownership, cost required to procure the system or to install the system, to run the system, and to maintain the system, all taken together over its period of expected life. It may be 15 years or 20 years. So he may come up and say that I want a very, very energy efficient system. I don't mind paying an extra bit of capital cost. However, I should have enough selling muscle power and strength when I go out to the market to my tenants and tell them that your operating cost will be least. So these are important considerations which must be documented before we start doing our engineering calculations and design. Similarly, flexibility of converting and redesigning spaces. Today we are having a good concept of what we call it as, plug and play. You must have heard about these terms. Plug and play means that a 10,000 square feet office, somebody is owning for 6 months or 1 year, and suddenly he goes out and a new tenant comes in. He has a different interior plan. So how adaptive is your air conditioning system design so that this design can be quickly shifted without much time and cost impact? So these are all key parameters which we must bear in our mind before we start designing the air conditioning system. So zoning. For achieving energy efficiency or the required level of cleanliness, I hope you understand that, the more clean you want a space, there is more level of filtration, which means more level of resistance to the air path. So more is the energy cost. So we need to zone spaces depending upon its operating hours, load profile, and cleanliness requirement, so that energy wastage can be minimized for unoccupied spaces or spaces which do not require large amount of cleanliness. So zoning is applicable for air side. I hope you realize by this time when we are talking of a central air conditioning system, because typically we will have a common plant consisting of the pumps, cooling tower, and the chilling machines. However, at times, even the high side, means the chiller plant, also the concept of zoning may come in, which we will touch upon later in the course of my presentation. Okay. So the next important step for system design is where typically you have already started in your courses. You actually do the heat load calculation, but I hope you understand that in a practical facility design, there are so many things which are required to be done, and we need to collect data before we actually start with our calculations, which is of course the heat load calculation and calculating the load diversity and its annual variation. Load diversity, as I said, as I already talked about diversity factor, if my total, suppose there are 100 zones and the total sum of the capacity of individual zones works out to say 2000 TR, we are not going to install 2000 TR as the peak working capacity. We will use our experience, we will talk to the operators, we will try and understand how the load variations will happen across the day, across the seasons of not only occupant load, but also plug loads, computer loads, and whatever gets added into the air conditioning load summary. And we will take a factor of say 80% or 75% or 85%, and we will size the chilling machine accordingly. Typically larger, I hope you understand, larger is the capacity or larger is the sum total of the load, we can actually go for a higher diversity. Higher diversity means 0.7 is a higher diversity than 0.8, correct? So apply load diversity based on application, peak simultaneous usage and experience. Today, softwares are available, even freely downloadable softwares are available from EPA and your ASHRAE, Energy Plus, hourly analysis program from Carrier, Tracer software from Trane, which can all give you a fair assessment of the total variation in terms of annual, daily. In fact, every 8760 hours, 8760 hours is 365 into 24. It gives you the profile of the load, what you can expect in your building, and accordingly you can design the high side or the chillers and the pumps and the cooling towers. So then comes which kind of system we are going to go for, whether standalone, decentralized or central, which we have just touched upon on its relative merits and demerits. Then we have to decide whether we go for air cooled and water cooled, depends upon local codes, availability of clean water, and the variation in ambient temperature vis-a-vis ambient humidity. These all are considerations to decide on which ultimate system to go for. For that, I have given you some kind of an analytical framework which can be used. And then we talk of the pumping systems, the air distribution, control philosophy, overall energy efficiency improvement strategies. And then last but not the least, no design is complete only through calculations and equipment sizing. You need to work with the architects and allocate the spaces and the shafts and passages through which the services like ducting, piping, cabling will run. So this is the last stage, but unless it is done, your design is not complete. So you need to locate space for the equipments, high side equipments, and the air handling units or the low side or the IDU, indoor units, if you are going for a centralized, a standalone or a semi-centralized kind of a system. Piping routes, cabling route, duct route, service shaft location, all needs to be worked out with the architect, keeping in mind the utilization of the space and the look and feel and aesthetics of the interior space. That's when you can say the design is complete, right? So This part of the presentation, I fully understand. Being students, you haven't liked it much, but believe me, when you actually start your professional career, you will see that these are the areas where the challenges exist more than actually designing the system. So we now going exactly into the calculations part and what we can do to make the system more efficient. So we need to look at what are the major contributors of AC system load. Of course, you can understand temperature to be maintained in conditioned space. Lower the temperature, higher is going to be the load. Fresh air requirement. This is extremely key, and we will just see in a couple of slides that fresh air is the single most highest contributor of load to an air conditioning system. Building envelope, you can understand that if you have a building envelope which has very high resistance or a low value of U, that is conductivity, then the ingress of outside heat into the building is going to be low. So occupancy and the nature of activity, which you cannot control because you are supposed to adapt your design to this, and lighting and equipment load. So these are the major contributors of air conditioning load. We will see now how each of this, or most of them, because I can't control on occupancy and mostly the lighting and equipment load, but these first three components, what are the ways we can reduce the load? So first is the temperature to be maintained. Now, ASHRAE, I hope all of you have heard about ASHRAE, American Society for Heating, Refrigeration and Air Conditioning Engineers. Standard 55 defines the thermal environmental condition for human occupancy and comfort. What it does basically is it combines the physical factors and the personal factors. We will see what does these two terms mean to produce a thermal environmental condition which is acceptable to the majority of the occupants within the space. So when I started my career, say about 25 years back, we were told by the owners or the consultants that I want 22 degrees centigrade to be maintained, 50 plus minus 5% humidity to be maintained. However, depending upon the air temperature, relative speed and humidity, which are the physical parameters, and personal factors like metabolic heat production and clothing, my comfort factor changes. Just to give you an example, if you are, say, in a place like Delhi and the outside temperature is, say, 5 degrees C, even if I maintain a temperature of, say, 18 degrees centigrade and you are expected to be wearing warm clothes, you will feel very comfortable. So please understand, instead of when your outdoor is 5 degrees centigrade, you need heating, not cooling, right? So instead of keeping a temperature of 22 degrees centigrade in a conditioned space in Delhi in winter, it is economical to maintain an 18 degrees centigrade. Similarly, when the outside temperature is, say, 40 degrees centigrade and you are wearing very light clothes, I need not maintain 22 degrees centigrade either. Even if I maintain 27 degrees centigrade temperature with a slightly higher air velocity, possibly you will feel comfortable. So this is what is, in short, the concept of adaptive thermal environment. So what it does is it gives us this kind of a graph. Instead of a single, see, 75 means roughly about 23 degrees centigrade. Instead of a single condition, depending upon, you see, this part is summer, I hope it is readable, and this part is winter. So what happens is, in winter, I can even maintain a temperature as low as 17 or 18 degrees C. And in summer, I can maintain a temperature as high as maybe 27 degrees C. And the relative humidity can vary from anything between 30% to 60 or 70% with the right airspeed, right? So depending upon the activity which people are doing, if you are in a gym, your metabolic activities are higher, you would require a lower temperature to feel comfortable. So typically, if you have noticed, if you go to a gym and you just stand there, you feel cold. If you are sleeping, your body will, because your metabolism is very low, your body will accept a much higher temperature as a comfort temperature. And that is the reason, if you see in air conditioning, in air conditioners, we have something called a sleep mode. What it does is, every hour, it resets the set point temperature by 0.5 degrees centigrade. So these are all strategies which earlier was not known or available with us. Now there is a code which gives me this variation to be built into my system design automatically, so that people are actually more comfortable, and at the same time we are saving on energy. So that's how the temp conditions plays a very major role in defining what is going to be the capacity of your refrigeration system or the heating system in case of a place like Delhi, right? Now, the second important we talked about was the fresh air. Now, what fresh air? Why do we require fresh air? Obviously, to dilute particles, harmful odor and gases, so that our IOQ is maintained. And at the same time, we provide proper oxygen levels or limit CO2 buildup, right? So maintain pressurization and to limit contamination. We have just discussed that earlier. Fresh air plays a role to achieve this function. Now, this is a typical building, and see what happens actually. There are people and furniture. Today, the tall buildings, high-rise buildings are mostly, you will see they're airtight because they're fully air conditioned. So what happens is the furniture, paint, everything, the clothing we wear, the carpets, they all emit VOCs, which are called volatile organic compounds. These are harmful gases for the human being. So smoking, of course, has been curtailed in most commercial buildings, but it is a pollutant. Now, pesticide contains carcinogens. Typically, if the design is not coordinated well with architects, so what will happen is architects will give you the place for placing your exhaust air and fresh air intakes, somebody at the back side of the building, where maybe it will not be free. You will have a loading dock will be nearby, because architect always wants all the uncouth things not to be visible to the occupants of the building. So you may always have a blocked fresh air entry and your building may suffer. There are chemical cleaning agents. So all this photocopying machine, they emit ozone. Ozone is a harmful gas for human being beyond a certain level. So the bathrooms, the toilets, the pantries where the humidity levels are typically high and there's a hell lot of a fungus growth. So all this actually make the indoor environment very, very unsuitable for good health. So fresh air plays the key role to keep the indoor air quality as per the acceptable norms. Now, how to consider or how to calculate how much fresh air we require? The ASHRAE standard is ASHRAE standard 62.1. It gives us the fresh air quantity depending upon the application, whether it is a theater, whether it's an office, whether it's various areas of hospitals, a gym, a school, an assembly place like a temple or a church or a mosque, a playing arena. It gives us what is the quantum of fresh air. Typically, it has got two components, one related to the amount of people present, and second is related to the volume of the space in terms of square feet. So typically, if you talk of an office, ASHRAE standard 62 says 5 CFM, CFM means cubic feet per minute per person, and 0.06 CFM per square feet. That's the fresh air requirement. So for every application, this fresh air requirement is defined in this code, which will help to maintain the proper IOQ level and the oxygen level. Now, this is taken from NBC, National Building Code. I hope you appreciate that the air conditioning design is a very climate specific design. You know, the kind of air conditioning system you need for, say, Himalayas is entirely different from the kind of air conditioning system you need to design for Delhi. So just to facilitate this, our country has been divided into 5 climatic zones: hot and dry, warm and humid, composite. Composite typically means very hot in summer and very cold in winter. Hot and dry, you understand. Warm, humid is typically our Calcutta conditions, which are near the coast. You see, India has a big coastline, and accordingly, we have a majority of our area is actually warm and humid, which is the most challenging climate condition for efficient energy design. Temperate, Bangalore, where it is never too hot and never too cold, and of course cold, which is in the northern part. So just to give you an idea, you know, that when I say that fresh air contributes to the maximum air conditioning load, here what is done is I have taken 12 of the largest cities in our country, right? These are the large 12 cities in our country. What I did was, I took an office space of 10,000 square feet, the same occupancy load, same lighting load, same equipment load, same fresh air recommendation as per green building, you know, 30% more than the ASHRAE standard 62.1, and the same room condition, 75 is about 22 or 23 degrees centigrade. So everything remaining same, the same building envelope condition, only the location changes, right? And let's see the percentage of fresh air load as the total load, except for Bangalore and Pune, it is falling in 20 to 30%. So in summer, most of the cities, the fresh air accounts for anything between 20 to 30% of the load. Now let's see what happens in monsoon. Except for Bangalore, where summer was 7.3, in monsoon it becomes 22.5% of the load. And again, maybe Pune, which is 26.78. You see here, 30 to 40% of the total air conditioning load is on account of fresh air. So I hope you understand, fresh air is the single most highest contributor of air conditioning load for most cities for a tropical country like India, right? So how do we deal with it? How do we manage fresh air efficiently? Because A, it increases the cooling capacity. B, it increases the operating cost because it increases the cooling capacity. And C, humidity, fresh air contains humidity, outside moisture. So it gives me a challenge of maintaining the humidity in the conditioned space as well. So how do we do it? How do we manage with it? The easiest way and the most common way is to use an enthalpy recovery wheel. Now what it does is, as we saw in the some of the earlier slides, that you cannot pump in fresh air, you have to extract a part of the conditioned air also, so that the dilution actually happens. So what we do is that return air from the conditioned space is collected and is made to pass through a wheel which is rotating at a very low speed. And what happens is the fresh air, which is having a high temperature and high moisture content, is passed through the other half of this rotating wheel. So what happens is, this coldness and relative dryness of the return air is used to temper or reduce the temperature of the fresh air and the moisture content of the fresh air, so that the load on the air conditioning system comes up. So what happens is, the return air from the conditioned space, it picks up moisture and heat from the fresh air and gets exhausted. And fresh air at high temperature and moisture content gets pre-cooled and slightly dehumidified when it goes to the cooling coil, reducing the load on the air conditioning equipment. This is how actually diagrammatically it works. If you see, this is the rotating wheel and this is the fresh air which comes through the lower part of this equipment, and this is how the air is exhausted out. So this is a very common device which is used to temper the fresh air and reduce the load on the air conditioning system. Another important feature in design, what we can do is CO2 based demand control ventilation. If you remember, I talked about, as per ASHRAE standard 62.1, the fresh air for an office, just for an example, is 5 CFM per person and say 0.06 CFM per square feet. So if we consider an office which has say 100 square feet per person as occupancy load, so per person the load becomes 5 plus 100 into 0.06 is 6. So say 11 CFM per person, correct? Now, when the occupancy level has come down from say 100 to say 300, Suppose it is in the late hours in office or early hours in the morning when the full crowd has not built into the office. So I don't require that amount of fresh air to be pumped in. So how do I get a feedback that yes, I can reduce the amount of fresh air which I'm taking into the system? A good indicator is the carbon dioxide percentage which is present in the occupied space. So typically we allow anything between 500 to 700 ppm of carbon dioxide. So if I see that my carbon dioxide level has come down to 400, so it's an indication to me that I can have an automated system which will sense the carbon dioxide and it will dampen or reduce the fresh air which is coming into the system. So if you just do this in your system, if you add it to your air conditioning system, it does help in reducing the overall energy conservation or energy consumption of your building, right? So most buildings are actually over ventilated in most part of the time because the design is always done for the peak, correct? What happened? Okay, now let's look at how can facade help us to reduce the air conditioning load, right? So avoid glass walls. These glass walls, what you see is an Western country or an American and European import to our design. America and Europe mostly is deep in the northern hemisphere. They get very, very oblique sun rays. So they need a lot of glass to bring in sun. We are a tropical country. We have a very high sun. We have direct access to sun rays. So even a 20 or 25% of a ratio of glass is enough to capture natural light. So this helps to reduce the air conditioning load. Underdeck insulation, because you understand that the roof becomes hot through its exposure to sun and actually radiates heat inside. So we can have a reflective roof or a vegetative roof which can reduce the ingress of heat into the building. Similarly, the exterior paints, we know that light color paints are reflective. It reflects a part of the sun energy. Don't go for a dark color building. We see dark color buildings. It's a horrible design with respect to air conditioning load. Even if you're not having a mechanical air conditioning, it just adds heat into the building, which is of no use. So these kind of architectural interventions are also key in limiting the maximum load and the part-time or the part load. We will discuss what part load is, and reducing the overall energy consumption is a building. You see, if India Habitat Center, if you have visited in Delhi or some of our old architectures, typically we used to have a veranda around our rooms. And you see, this is a very classic design which actually buffers the air conditioning space from direct exposure to walls. So what it helps is, it helps to keep the buildings cool. So these kind of passive, interventions can, through architectural design, through space planning, can actually reduce as much as 10% of the total air conditioning power consumption. So I will leave this presentation with Gaurav and others, so you can take this presentation. It gives you, say like here, building envelope options to reduce cooling load. It talks of increasing insulation in the building envelope. It talks of using shading devices. So basically, you have an automatic shading device in your windows. So when it is sun glare is coming, you automatically close a part of the window so that you can take the natural light but reflect a part of the incoming heat. So the roofing, using a green roof, so that what happens in a green roof or a vegetative roof is, when you irrigate the roof, a part of that water evaporates and it takes heat out from the building itself. Reflective china tiles on the roof helps to reflect the heat back. Even the orientation of building, can we use two towers to cast shadow on one another at different period of the day, thereby reducing the incidence of incoming heat from the ambient to the building. So all these are, passive strategies which can be very, very intelligently used to reduce the cooling demand in a building, right? So we have gone through optimizing condition, space, temperature, reducing building envelope load. These are primarily used to reduce the peak demand. However, you will appreciate that there is a hell lot of seasonal variation, daily variation in outside condition. There is a variation in occupant load, plug load, lighting load, other equipment load. So typically the air conditioning system, as we will see just a couple of slides later, only it operates at about 1% of annual hours in its peak capacity. 99% of the time, the air conditioning system is working in reduced capacity. So that is what we term as a part load. So improving part load energy efficiency is actually a key element to ensure that we achieve overall energy efficiency in year-round operation. So what are some of the strategies? Few we have already seen, few we are going to see in subsequent slides. Like enthalpy and heat recovery system, we have already seen it. Decoupler systems, we will talk about. Series counterflow chillers, I'm just giving you these names, so if you're interested, you can Google it or you can do your own studies. I am, due to paucity of time, I will not be able to talk about all the systems which can be used to improve part load energy efficiency, but some things which are more common, I will be touching upon, like variable flow pumping system, I will be touching upon. Magnetic levitation chillers is one I will be talking about. Variable air volume systems, chill beams and underflow distributions I will be talking about. District cooling, high delta T, little bit I will touch upon. So these are some of the strategies which, if you employ in your design, will help you to improve the part load energy efficiency. And of course, last but not the least, the chill water reset control, which when I said about adaptive comfort, that how we can change the temperature depending upon the season we are talking about, depending upon the metabolic rate. Now it cannot be done manually. To do it automatically, you need this chill water reset control. Okay, so as we go into the energy efficiency portion of today's webinar, just to give you a feel of which components consume how much energy. Chiller, the chilling machine, consumes almost 60% of the total air conditioning system power on a year-round operation. Correct? The next key item which consumes power is actually the chill water pumps, about 15%. Now, I hope you understand, depending upon the energy efficiency features you add, depending upon the location, depending upon operating hours, depending upon the size of the system, these percentages may vary. So these are only a tentative, indicative figure. It can vary even to quite some extent. So the next component after the chill water pump is the air handling units, which basically the fans which drive the air. And then of course we have cooling tower and the condenser water pumps consuming the total 100%. So you can understand, if you want an efficient system, we need to look at the chiller, of course, but individually each of the other components also we need to see how can we reduce the energy consumption. Now, this is just an example of how, in a typical office, how load can vary in a multi-tenanted building. Say in the month of May, it may vary from anything between, the peak demand is about 1000 TR. So it can start anything between 150 odd TR in the month of May, can be the lowest. And maybe in November, it can be as low as maybe even 100 tons. And as during the day, the occupancy rises, the ambient load changes, you can see a variation of load as high as from say 1000 tons to about say 150 tons. And maybe in winter, it may be say 100 tons to about say 600 odd tons. So even for very large systems and very varied occupancy, we have seen systems where the load variation can be even from 5% to 100% over a period of a year, right? So we need to design for high part load efficiency. So before that, we need to work out the number of hours of operation at various loads and then optimize the equipment selection at those part load points and compare the systems to arrive at what is the most optimum energy efficient system. Now, as I said, there are software applications, some of them are freely downloadable, which can help you in doing it. In case you don't have time or don't have data for the load variation, because software will work only if you give the correct input. So you may have the weather variation data, you may not have the occupant variation data or the plug load data or the connected load data. So possibly you are not in a position to use the software effectively. So in those cases, what you can do is AHRI, American Air Conditioning, Heating and Refrigeration Institute. It's an America-based your body which deals with a lot of systems, standards, testing standards. Now, they have actually said this, that if you don't have this load variation, a safe way to analyze your various alternative systems or equipments at 4 points. And it says that any equipment or a system will run at 100% load only for 1% of annual operating hours. It will run at 75% load for about 42% of the annual operating hours. It will run at 50% load for about 45% of annual operating hours and about 25% load for 12% of annual operating hours. I hope you understand. These are just indicative figures, but in absence of any data, if you want to compare systems, this is a good way for comparing it. And I hope you also see this, that in 1992, it was having a different weightage for the various percentages of load. But further research data has refined it into this 1, 42, 45, and 12%. And till today, 2020, we are at this level, 1%, 42%, 45%, and 12%. So in absence of any real load distribution data or reliable load distribution data, we can follow this for comparing our systems and taking a final call. So when we are selecting the chiller, because the chiller consumes 60% of the energy, it is an extremely important parameter which we look at when we buy a chiller. We must look at what is called as an IPLV, integrated part load value. This is something which the chiller manufacturer will give you through a certified product literature. It basically works on these percentages, and it gives you an efficiency figure which can either be in terms of COP. COP is coefficient of performance, which is a unitless factor or a number, which gives you the numerator is the heat removed divided by energy input to the system, both expressed in the same unit. Either it will express in COP terms, coefficient of performance, or it will indicate in terms of IKW per TR, which basically means input kilowatt per ton of refrigeration. So while COP, higher the COP, it is better. When we talk of IKW per TR, lower the value, I hope you understand, it is better. So we need to, instead of asking what is the efficiency of the chiller at 100%, we need to ask for what is the efficiency of the chiller at part load conditions or integrated part load value, or this weighted average operation, what is the efficiency we are looking at, right? So how do we improve the efficiency of a chilling machine? Typically, we will see variable speed drive is a very common way of increasing efficiency of large air conditioning chillers, because what happens in a variable speed driven machine, whether it's a centrifugal chiller or a pump or a fan, it follows what is called as a fan law. We will see that where, the power consumption reduces in cubic proportion of speed. So basically it means is when you require 80% of refrigerant flow to say cater to a demand of somewhere near 80% of your system, if you are able to run the machine at 80% speed, then actually the power consumption comes down by 0.8 into 0.8 into 0.8. So that's what cubic proportion means. We will see that in few more slides later. Now this is technology which has been around for almost 10 years now. Magnetic levitation, this is basically the concept in which the bullet train runs. So you will understand that in any high speed machinery like a compressor, lot of energy is wasted in the form of a friction loss in the bearings. What it does is it creates a magnetic field in the bearing, and the shaft, instead of touching the bearing, it floats in the bearing. So there are three immediate advantages. First is we can run the machine at a very high speed because there is hardly any noise. The noise what you see in a machine comes out because of friction. It increases the energy efficiency because there is no friction loss in the bearings. And number three, the moment you have a bearing, you need a lubrication system. If my shaft is not touching the bearing, I don't require a lubrication system. So, this is something which is becoming very common, and more air conditioning systems are actually going for this magnetic levitation machines, which gives you very good IPLVs, integrated part load values, and no oil because there is no bearing lubrication required. And because it is connected to a variable speed drive, another advantage is when you start the machine, because it slowly ramps up its speed to the desired level, it starts consuming current in a very gradual way. Unlike a fixed speed machine or a motor, which eventually drives the compressor, if you start, typically in your house also, if you stay in an apartment, the moment you switch on your water supply pump, there is a dip in the voltage, your light, fan, everything comes down. So that's a shock to your electrical system, because when you start an equipment direct online, it consumes 6 times its normal operating current. But in a variable speed drive machine, whether you have a magnetic bearing or not, actually the current slowly ramps up. So your electrical system doesn't experience that sudden shock. Now, when you are designing, we have now certain documents available with us, which helps us to provide a guidance. You may be immediately asking a question. Okay, you are asking that go for a lower IPLV, but what is the limit? Suppose I want a GRIHA compliant building. What is the efficiency I should achieve at? Now, this ECBC, Energy Conservation Building Code, which started in 2007 and the latest version is 2017, actually gives you a guidance. What is the efficiency level you should look at? And if you look at this, it has COP and IPLV. COP, as you understand, is at 100% load, and IPLV is basically the part load at those 100, 75, 50, and 12% those load bins. So it has 3 levels of compliance. First is an ECBC building, which is a lower level of compliance. So if you want to comply to ECBC norms, you need a COP of 4.7 and 5.8 for, say, a chiller capacity of less than 260 watts, which is roughly about, say, 85 tons. If you go for a second higher level of compliance, which is called a ECBC plus building, you see there is a difference. The COP level from 4.7 goes to 5.2, and IPLV from 5.8 goes to 6.9 level. If you want to go for a still higher level of compliance, which is called a super ECBC building, you see what are the minimum requirements. So these are some of the guidelines which, as a designer, you can follow, of course, depending upon what the owner has told you or what is your intent of the design. This is a very living and important document which I would request all of you to just go through it, because it is not only the chiller with respect to what should be the building envelope considerations for various climatic zones of the building. It gives us what should be the limiting factor of lighting to be used for illumination. All the energy efficiency features in a building, it gives you a background and also gives you some tips on how to achieve it. Similarly, this was for a water cooled chiller. This is for an air cooled chiller. Okay. When it comes to fan, what is the guideline we may look at for benchmarking the efficiency of the system? The document to follow is SMACNA, Sheet Metal and Air Conditioning Contractors National Association. Now, all these documents are freely available in the net. Please understand that a fan typically is very easy to get a high efficiency fan when you have the diameter side is high. So typically say 1100 mm or 1200 mm or maybe higher than that. However, if you have a smaller diameter of fan, it is very difficult to get a high efficiency for a smaller diameter fan. Now, earlier, typically the specifications or the requirements used to say something like this, that fan efficiency should be minimum 65%. Now, while it is very easy to get a 65% efficient fan for a bigger diameter, it's virtually impossible to get a 65% efficient fan for, say, a 200 diameter fan. So to address this issue, if you look at this, these are called FEG curves. Now, what it says is, if you look at this FEG 90, so it says that these are the diameters along your x-axis. So if you see here, efficiency grading of FEG 90 fan, if it is up to say 600, 700 or 500, the desired efficiency level is somewhere around say 82%. However, the same FEG 990 fan for a size of say 200 diameter, the expectation is only about 60%. Okay, so nowadays, if you look at our National Building Code, it says that for any building, we should use a fan of an FEG, minimum FEG 65 or 63, I think somewhere around that. So we are somewhere here. So it at least gives a benchmark for minimum efficiency to be followed when we are designing our system, right? Similarly, if you look at ASHRAE standard 90.1, which is basically another code which gives you a lot of tips on how to benchmark energy efficiency of your system, not only for air conditioning, for all other building services as well. ECBC, to a large extent, has taken a lot of inputs from ASHRAE standard 90.1. So 2-3 more concepts. I will try and finish it in another 15 or 20 minutes. Decoupled refrigeration system. Now, in a central plant, the most common chill water temperature we consider, as we said, 44, 45, is about 6 to 7 degrees centigrade. This is the temperature at which water goes into the air handling unit. After picking up the heat, it comes back at 11 to 12 degrees centigrade. Now, how these temperatures had got fixed? This is because for comfort applications, if we want to maintain a 23 degrees centigrade with about say 50% relative humidity, I understand from Anando that all of you guys have done your heat load calculation. You will understand what is sensible heat ratio. So for a typical commercial or a comfort application, you requiring a sensible heat ratio of 0.9, my ADP, apparatus dew point, or it is ADP means basically the temperature at which air needs to come into the conditioned space so that it can take the requisite amount of sensible and latent load and arrive at the desired condition of say 23 degrees C and 50% RH. So that ADP requirement is 13 to 14 degrees C. So for maintaining this 13 to 14 degrees C, outlet air of the cooling coil, we need a temperature of 12 degrees, 6 degrees to be maintained. Right? There's no rocket science in this. Now let us go a little deeper. I hope you understand. Lower is the chill water temperature required to be maintained, higher is the power consumption, right? So is there a way we can increase this average ADP or the average chill water outlet temperature, which will result in a lot of energy efficiency for the system? Now, how do we do it? So lower the latent load, higher is the sensible heat ratio. Sensible heat ratio is basically the ratio of room sensible heat divided by room sensible plus room latent load. So lower is the latent load, higher is the sensible heat ratio and higher is the ADP, and higher we can maintain the chill water temperature. Similarly, higher is the latent load, lower will be the sensible heat ratio, and lower will be the ADP temperature, and lower will be the requirement of the chill water temperature, right? Every degree C increase in chill water temperature increases the energy efficiency by approximately 2%. So I hope you realize that if there is a methodology by which I can increase the average apparatus dew point or chill water temperature by say 5 degrees C, I can work out a 10%, which is a fantastic saving of year-round performance. Now, just an input, in any commercial building, typically, depending upon the energy efficient features you add to your system, for a tropical country like India, air conditioning system can consume as high as more than 50% of your total building electrical power consumption. Okay, so when we talk of a 5% saving or 10% saving in terms of your energy bill, it actually means a lot of money, right? So we need to look at strategies for increasing overall system ADP and operate at higher chill water temperature. Now, how do we do it? Now, this is the approximate composition we have seen in my earlier analysis of 12 large cities, that fresh air load constitute almost 30% of the total air conditioning load. We have seen that already, right? Now, let us see what is the latent load composition. In the 70 units, typically internal loads for a standard commercial comfort application, because the latent load contributors are only human beings through our breathing. It's only 2 units. However, in fresh air load, the content of latent can be as high as 18 units. And as we have seen, that it is the latent load which determines the ADP and the chill water temperature. So if we provide 2 separate chill water systems or refrigeration system for the internal loads and the fresh air loads, let's see what happens. So for internal loads, you can see the sensible heat ratio will be extremely high, right? It will be 68 by 70. So actually the ADP can be maintained at 20 degrees C, which will require a living chill water temperature of about 14 degrees C instead of 6 or 7 degrees. And for the fresh air load, the ADP, because it is 12 by 30, very low ADP, the ADP will be maintained at 10 degrees centigrade, requiring a living temperature of 5 degrees centigrade. So if I look at the weighted average, my net ADP for the system, if I have 2 different systems, will be much higher than 6 to 7 degrees C. So instead of operating a single chill water plant 100% capacity at 6 or 7 degrees C, we can operate 2 plants, 75 to 85% capacity at about 14 degrees and balance 20 to 25% capacity at about 5 degrees C. This arrangement, a simple mathematics will show you, can give me almost 10 to 15% savings over a year-round performance. So that's what is the chill water decoupled system means, where we handle the internal loads and the fresh air loads separately. This was the fan and pump flow I was talking about. So whether it is a pumping system or a refrigeration system, where speed of the machine is directly proportional to the flow. CFM is just the unit of flow, cubic feet per minute. So power consumption will be in cubic root. So it basically means that if my requirement of flow is 90%, my power requirement goes down to 0.9 into 0.9 into 0.9, which is 73%. So as you have seen earlier, that we have most of the time, the system operates at 75 to 50% load. So actually my power consumption can get lowered to even 42 or 12% loads. So this is where a variable speed drive machine, wherever it is possible, we should apply. A second concept I would like to talk about is the chill water flow. If you remember the first slide when we were talking about the schematic chill water system, we were talking of a bypassing. Okay, so this is this bypass line. So what happens is, even if the load in the AHU air handling units are less, the water gets bypassed the cooling coil gets bypassed, but the pump is actually handling the same amount of water flow, right? So I'm not taking advantage of this cubic proportion of reduced power. What we can do is we can have a variable flow pumping system where I don't bypass water. I throttle the valve to reduce the water which is going or required to go inside the loads or cooling coils. And I have an electronic pressure transmitter to sense this reduction in flow and give an input to the pump controller to reduce the speed and get advantage of the cubic proportions, right? So I will not go through this load delta T. It's basically instead of, you see, at the end of the day, the Q or the energy or heat you need to remove depends upon the specific heat capacity, the flow rate, and the delta temperature. So instead of using high US GPM is US gallons per minute, basically the flow rate. So instead of maybe 3 US gallons per minute per TR, if we can go to a low flow of only 1.5, then what happens is my pumping power comes down. But yes, there is a penalty on the temperature because I need to maintain an even lower temperature for the chillers, which will increase the power consumption of the chiller. So we need to actually do an evaluation whether the benefit of chill water pumping system is more than covering up my loss of efficiency in the chiller. Otherwise, we go to the standard systems. So this is, again, mathematics gives you an idea what we should aim at when we talk of the total energy efficiency of a system for a year-round operation, right? So if you see my IKW per TR or kilowatt per ton for year-round efficiency of a plant, which consists of the chilling machine, the pumps, the cooling tower, if we are able to take to this level 0.5, 0.6, then we say it's an excellent design, right? So when we started about quarter of century back, we were all here 1.1, 1.21. But now the designs, what we are mostly doing, we are in this range. So let's all, as young designers and engineers, let's try to achieve this level of energy efficiency, which will really help us to develop a sustainable world around us, right? So chill beams, it's another very interesting concept where you use, if you have cold air at the top, the cold air on its own will come down. And once that cold air becomes hot, its density will reduce, it will go up. So instead of driving a fan, why can't we use this natural principle to increase energy efficiency? So this is another, intervention which we can think of where we can use chill beams to reduce the fan power consumption, right? And typically we have passive chill beams where the chill water you can see is going, so the air becomes cold, comes down, hot air goes up and comes back, and it maintains a circulation. But this circulation may not be adequate for the amount of air circulation we require in the room. So what is done is some amount of fresh air is actually pumped through a fan through a nozzle. And through Venturi effect, what happens is this nozzle creates a low pressure zone here, which helps to induce air from below and increases the capacity of the chill beam. So in commercial buildings, wherever chill beams are used, basically these are the active chill beams which are more common than the passive chill beams. So these photographs gives you an idea of how things looks like. It uses the convection air current to produce airflow within the conditioned space instead of or reducing the artificial fan power. Underflow air distribution is another very good innovation which has been around for about 15 years or so. It basically instead of throwing supply air from the top and air conditioning the entire space below the false ceiling to the desired temperature of 24 or 25, why can't we throw supply air from the bottom and ensure that up to the man height only, we maintain a temperature of 24 at 25 and let the temperature above that go up. So it reduces my total cooling capacity for the building and helps me to improve the energy efficiency of the system, correct? So again, I will not go into deep of this. This presentation will be available. You can go through it. It talks of different methods of underfloor air conditioning and what are the advantages it has. So you could, if you're able to fit it into your design for your design competition, you can go through a little bit more detail here, which will give you the methods to use, what are the options of air distribution, and what are the things you need to be careful about. Now, what this underfloor air distribution also does is, it does help some amount of local climate control. I hope you understand that if you are in a large open office, you are maintaining a same temperature of say 25 degrees C. Somebody may be comfortable at 25, but there will be a lot of people who are feeling hot at 25 degrees C, and some people will consider, will feel cold at 25 degrees. So if you have an underfloor, you can have a fan speed control for that local area. You know, like say these are my outlets, so I can have a local outlet for this area, for these individual areas, so that this fellow can have a better control on this climate around him, rather than experiencing an average temperature for the entire air conditioned floor space. So, and research has shown that if you're able to give a microclimate control to the occupants, it helps to improve its productivity and his comfort coefficient in an air conditioned space. Now, this is exactly what I was talking about. What happens in a constant volume, multiple space, you are maintaining a single thermostat, a single temperature. So somebody may feel stuffy, somebody hot, somebody is fine, somebody is freezing. So another way of achieving this is through a variable air volume system. Now, what it does in a variable air volume system is, if you see a constant air volume system, what happens is we have only one temperature controller, and the supply air is going to the space, and the average temperature is what the cooling coil is maintaining, right? But in a variable air volume, if you see, this supply air is divided into various zones, and each zones has got its own variable air volume box with its damper and its thermostat. So depending upon the microclimate requirement, this throttle or reduce, increase the airflow, and try to maintain the set point of this particular thermostat. Similarly, this zone with its own VAV box will have a separate set of control. Finally, going back to the same air handling device with a variable speed drive, which will equate the pressure and will ensure that the right quantity of air is going into the individual required spaces and will maintain the total speed. So this will allow, this is how it looks like, VAV control for each zone. This will help to improve the energy efficiency of the system, as well as give comfort to the smaller areas as per its specific requirement, correct? So you typically, with multiple zone controls and VAV boxes, more or less all the occupants will say that yes, we are feeling comfortable. So with this, I come almost to the end of my presentation. Today we are living in COVID times, so I need to tell you something which of course it's not practically possible for decentralized or standalone systems, but it central air conditioning systems where each and every component you can design to your requirement. We can actually have UVC emitters at the cooling coil. This is how the UVC emitters looks like. It's basically emits UV radiation in C band, which is above the ultraviolet. And there are methods to improve the efficiency of this, its functioning. Basically what it does is it destroys the RNA of virus so that the viruses are rendered ineffective. And at the same time, it reduces the VOC content, which acts as a food for the bacteria. So this UVC emitters helps to kill the biofilms which typically gets deposited in any moist surface. And I hope you understand, in the cooling coil, but the temperature are very low and condensation is happening, there is always a lot of biofilm growth which is seen. So to increase the indoor air quality and to mitigate the risk of the spreading of virus, UVC emitters gives a good way of controlling this biological nuisances. All right. So this is what I thought I will present to you. I'm sorry for slightly longish 1 hour 30, but anyway, I warned you before I started. So thank you, stay safe and healthy. And Albert Einstein, this is really a great statement he made, that the whole science is nothing more than a refinement of everyday thinking. So thank you very much.